When a powerful man believes he owns you. What happens when a powerful man believes he owns you? Proudly declaring to the world that you're nothing without him? For Eleanor, walking away from her marriage was an act of raw survival. Her husband, Mark, simply laughed. "Give her a week," he'd boasted to his friends. "She'll come crawling back, begging." He was so certain he had broken her. What he didn't know was that she was pregnant. And he never could have imagined that just hours after his arrogant boast, a reclusive billionaire, a man with a secret past of his own, would find her at her darkest moment and make her an offer that would change everything. The light from the crystal chandelier in the New York City Polo Club dripped down onto the city's elite. On the outside, Eleanor Vargas was the picture of perfect success, her arm looped through her husband's, Mark Vargas. He was a man sculpted by ambition and privilege, a senior partner in an investment fund who wore his success like a tailored suit. Eleanor, in a sapphire blue dress that matched her eyes, wore a smile she'd practiced for years, one that never reached her eyes. On the inside, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Every conversation was a performance, every laugh a carefully calibrated note. Mark was in his element, holding court. His confident baritone cut through the polite chatter. "The market is volatile, but ultimately predictable," he told a circle of admirers. "You just have to know how to play the game. It's about nerve." He squeezed Eleanor's arm, a gesture of possession disguised as affection. "My wife, Eleanor, is an architect, or was. She gave it all up for a far more important project. Me." A murmur of polite laughter followed. Eleanor's smile tightened. She had been a rising star at her firm, praised for her innovative, sustainable designs. Mark had called her ambition cute at first, then a distraction, and finally unnecessary. He had convinced her that his career was the only one that mattered, that her role was to be the perfect hostess, the beautiful accessory that proved his life was as well managed as his investment portfolio. Later, near the silent auction tables, she overheard a fragment of conversation from her supposed best friend, Claudia, talking to another woman. "She looks so tired," Claudia whispered. "Mark says she's been so emotional lately." The words landed like a slap of cold water. It was Mark's narrative. He had been seeding this idea for months, painting her as unstable, her quiet desperation reframed as a hormonal imbalance. He was isolating her, one friend at a time, making sure that if she ever screamed, no one would hear. The final breaking point wasn't a bang, it was a toast. A prospective client, a man named Mr. Thompson, raised his glass to Mark. "To Mark Vargas, a man who has it all, a brilliant career and a beautiful, devoted wife. Tell me, Mark, what's your secret?" Mark beamed, his ego swelling to fill the space. He leaned in conspiratorially. "The secret? You have to be the sun in their sky. Without you, their world goes dark. Right, darling?" He looked at Eleanor, his eyes gleaming with a challenge. The room waited for her submissive nod. But something inside her, a long, dormant sliver of steel, refused. She just stared back, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, his polished mask slipped. She saw a flicker of panic, of cold fury at her insubordination. He recovered quickly, laughing. "She's playing shy." The car ride home was a suffocating, silent hell. The moment the heavy oak door of their Upper East Side townhouse closed, the performance was over. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, yanking at his tie. "You made me look like a fool. You're supposed to play your part." "What part, Mark?" Eleanor's voice was dangerously quiet. "The adoring doll with no thoughts of her own?" "It's the part that paid for your dress, for this house, for your entire life," he roared, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. "You were nothing before me. Just a simple draftswoman in a cubicle. I gave you everything. You took everything away from me, she whispered, the truth landing with the force of a physical blow. My career, my friends, my confidence. She looked around the opulent, sterile space. It wasn't a home. It was a set. A gilded cage. Oh, this is rich, he sneered, following her as she walked in a daze toward the master bedroom. You're getting all dramatic again. Is it that time of the month? She stopped, her back to him. That was it. The final, casual dismissal of her humanity. She turned, her eyes clear and cold. No, Mark, it's not. She walked into the walk-in closet, a room larger than her first apartment, and pulled out a single suitcase. She didn't pack the designer clothes or the jewels he had bought her, the golden shackles. She packed the few things that were truly hers, a worn copy of The Fountainhead, her old sketchbooks, a framed photo of her late parents. Mark watched, a sneer on his lips. He leaned against the doorframe, radiating an unassailable confidence. This is pathetic, Eleanor. Where will you go? Your sister's? Her little 2-bedroom apartment? You'll last a week, maybe 2 before you realize the mistake you're making. She zipped the suitcase and walked past him without a word. He grabbed her arm. You are not walking away from me. I should have done it years ago, she said, wrenching her arm free. His sneer widened into a smile of pure arrogance. Fine, go. Have your little tantrum. But you'll be back. You'll come crawling. You are nothing without me, and you know it. His last, cruelest blow came as her hand was on the front door, spoken loudly for the imaginary audience in his head. I'll tell everyone at the club you've had a little breakdown. They'll understand. When you come back, tail between your legs, we'll say you just needed a little rest. She stepped out into the cold New York night. The door closed behind her with a definitive click. She didn't look back. She hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of the cheapest, most anonymous motel on the outskirts of the city. In the sterile, bleach-smelling room of the Starlight Motel, under the flickering neon sign, Eleanor finally allowed herself to break. Sobs shook her body, a storm of grief for the years she had lost, and of terror for the future she couldn't see. Her money was in a joint account. He controlled it. She had less than $30 in her purse. He was right. She had nothing. Then she remembered. The tiredness, the recent nausea she had blamed on stress. Her period, which he had so cruelly mentioned, was 6 weeks late. With shaking hands, she rummaged through her purse and pulled out the emergency drugstore bag she had bought on the way here. Not for pills, but for a pregnancy test. She sat on the edge of the dingy bathtub, waiting for the longest 3 minutes of her life. And there it was. 2 pink lines, clear and unforgiving. Pregnant. A wave of sheer terror washed over her, followed by something else, something fierce and unexpected. Resolve. This was no longer just about her. She wasn't saving just herself. She was saving her child. Mark would never, ever have this child. He would not turn her son or daughter into another accessory in his perfect life. His boast rang in her ears. You'll be back, crawling. Never, she whispered to the empty room, a protective hand on her still flat stomach. Never. She felt utterly, terribly alone. But as she stared at the pink lines, she realized she wasn't. The next 24 hours were a blur of cheap coffee and fear. The Starlight Motel was a symphony of misery. The groan of trucks on the nearby highway, the muffled arguments from next door, the constant hum of the old air conditioner. Eleanor sat on the lumpy bed, her sketchbook open in her lap. But her hands wouldn't move. The creative spark that had once defined her felt like a distant memory, snuffed out by years of Mark's casual disregard. She had called her sister Maya, an impetuous social worker, who had never bought into Mark's charm. "Oh, Ellie, finally," Maya had breathed. "I'm coming to get you. You can stay with me. We'll figure it out." But the thought of being a burden on Maya, of cramming herself into her tiny one-bedroom with a baby on the way, filled Eleanor with a fresh wave of shame. Mark had orchestrated this. He had systematically dismantled her support systems until he was the only one left standing, the sole provider, the benevolent dictator. Crawling back to him would be a surrender. Crawling to her sister felt like a different kind of defeat. She was staring up at the water-stained ceiling, tracing the cracks and imagining them as fault lines in her own life when her phone vibrated. It was a number she didn't recognize, with a sleek, minimalist prefix she vaguely associated with international business. Probably a wrong number. She ignored it. It vibrated again, and a third time. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. It was Mark. He must have gotten a burner phone to harass her, to wear her down. Steeling herself, she answered, ready to hang up immediately. "Hello?" she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. There was a pause, and then a voice, low and calm, with an unmistakable European accent. It was not Mark. "Am I speaking with a Ms. Eleanor Davis?" The use of her maiden name was a jolt. No one had called her that in 6 years. "Who is this?" "My name is Julian Devereaux." The name rang a distant bell. Devereaux. Devereaux Capital. A global investment firm known for its almost mythical success and its enigmatic, reclusive founder. A man who occasionally appeared in the financial pages, but never in the gossip columns. He was a legend, a ghost in the machinery of global finance. She had seen him once, years ago, when she attended a conference on sustainable urban development, where he was a surprise guest speaker. He had spoken with a quiet intensity that had captivated the entire auditorium. "Mr. Devereaux, I don't understand. How did you get this number?" "I have resourceful people," he said simply, without a hint of boastfulness. It was a statement of fact. "I was at the gala last night. I happened to observe your departure." Eleanor's face burned with humiliation. He had seen it. The public, silent schism. The look on Mark's face, her escape. "I see. Ms. Davis," he continued, his tone remaining perfectly level and professional. "Several years ago, before your marriage, you submitted a proposal to a competition for the design of the new International Lycée in Strasbourg, a project my foundation was funding." She remembered it vividly. It was her passion project, a design she had poured her soul into. A school built around a central, sun-drenched atrium, utilizing recycled timber and geothermal heating. A building meant to breathe, to nurture. She had been a finalist, but had withdrawn her proposal after Mark proposed. He told her it was time to focus on their future. "Yes, I remember it," she said, her voice thick with a sudden sharp ache for the woman she had been. "I always believed it was the superior design," Julian Devereaux said. "It was innovative, humane, and elegant. It was a crime that it was never built." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. To hear her work, buried for so long, spoken of with such respect by a man of his stature was unnerving. It was water on parched earth. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "I am not calling for a simple compliment, Ms. Davis," he said. "I am calling with a proposition. I am aware of your situation, at least the broad strokes. I know a man like Mark Vargas. His ego is his primary currency. He will not let you go easily, and he will ensure you have nowhere to go." She couldn't speak. He had just articulated her deepest fear with chilling accuracy. "I am flying to Paris tonight from JFK," he said. "My jet leaves in 3 hours. I have an empty apartment in the 6th arrondissement, overlooking the Luxembourg Gardens. It is quiet, private, and yours for as long as you need it. No stipulations, no expectations. Consider yourself a fellow, a chance to breathe, a chance to pick up a pencil again. The offer was so extravagant, so utterly outside the realm of possibility, she almost laughed. A billionaire she had never met was offering her a sanctuary in Paris because he liked a design she had drawn 7 years ago. It sounded like the plot of a fairy tale, or, more likely, a cruel, sophisticated trap. Why? She asked, the single word encompassing all her suspicion and disbelief. Why would you do this? There was a longer pause on the line this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, less the titan of industry, more human. Let's just say I have a profound dislike for wasted potential, he said, and an even deeper dislike for men who mistake possession for partnership. Your husband made a public boast last night that you would come crawling back. I found it a distasteful sentiment. I am offering you an alternative to crawling. An alternative to crawling. The words resonated deep in her soul. 3 hours, he repeated. A black sedan will be waiting at the entrance of the Starlight Motel in 30 minutes. The driver's name is Jean-Pierre. He will not speak unless spoken to. If you are not there, he will leave, and I will not contact you again. The choice is entirely yours, Ms. Davis. He hung up. The silence in the room was absolute. Eleanor stared at the phone in her hand. This was insane. It was a risk of monumental proportions. Who was this man? What were his true motives? She was a pregnant, vulnerable, and alone woman. Getting into a stranger's car, flying to a foreign country on his whim, was sheer madness. But what was the alternative? Maya's couch, the pitying looks, the inevitable legal battle with Mark, where he would use his army of lawyers to paint her as an unstable, unfit gold digger and try to take her child. He would grind her to dust. Julian Devereaux's offer was a leap into the unknown, a jump from a cliff. But staying felt like being buried alive, slowly and methodically. He knew about Mark's boast. He was offering her a direct countermeasure in a game she hadn't even known was being played. This wasn't about rescuing a damsel. It felt strategic. It felt like he was backing the underdog in a fight he wanted to see won. She looked at her single suitcase, her sketchbook, her reflection in the dark television screen. A pale, frightened woman with a universe of fight in her eyes. She had 30 minutes to decide. She stood up. A new energy coursed through her. The fear was still there, a cold current below the surface. But now it was joined by a wild, terrifying spark of hope. She smoothed down her clothes, took a deep breath, and grabbed her suitcase. She didn't want cages anymore. Gilded or grimy, a cage was still a cage. She was going to take the leap. The 30 minutes felt like a lifetime and a single heartbeat. Eleanor stood just inside the door of her motel room, peering through a slit in the curtains. The parking lot was a desolate expanse of cracked asphalt, dotted with rusted cars and a single overflowing dumpster. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel sputtered and popped, casting a sickly pink glow. This was the pathetic end of the road that Mark had predicted for her. Then, exactly on time, a car pulled into the lot. It moved with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly foreign to the surroundings. A black Audi A8, its tinted windows an impenetrable obsidian. It didn't look like a car. It looked like a piece of the night that had detached itself and settled. It came to a stop at the curb, its engine a barely perceptible hum. This was the moment of choice made real. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could stay, call Maya, and choose the known, difficult path. Or she could step out that door into a future that was a complete, terrifying blank. An alternative to crawling. Eleanor took one last look at the miserable room that had been both her sanctuary and her prison for a day and walked out. The night air was humid and smelled of exhaust. As she neared the car, the back door opened softly from the inside. A man in a simple dark suit with a chauffeur's cap stood by the open door. He was older, with a kind, weathered face. "Ms. Davis?" he asked, his voice soft with the promised French accent. "I am Jean-Pierre." She nodded, unable to speak. He took her single suitcase from her hand, as if it weighed nothing, and placed it carefully in the trunk. He held the door for her, and she slid into the back seat. The transition was jarring. The outside world was noise and grime. Inside, there was absolute silence and cool, leather-scented air. The door closed with a soft, satisfying thud, sealing her off from her old life. The car pulled away as smoothly as it had arrived, leaving the Starlight Motel and its flickering sign behind in the rearview mirror. They drove in silence, as promised. Jean-Pierre navigated the New York traffic with unhurried competence. Eleanor watched as the familiar city lights blurred by the window, but they felt like scenes from someone else's life. The grand buildings of the Upper East Side, the gleaming towers of the financial district where Mark held court. It all suddenly felt alien. She was an observer, a passing ghost. They didn't head for the main terminal at JFK. Jean-Pierre took them to a private air terminal on the opposite side of the runways, a place of quiet efficiency for the global elite. He pulled up directly beside a sleek Gulfstream G650, its white fuselage gleaming under the floodlights. The logo of Devereaux Capital, a stylized D that looked like a bird in flight, was emblazoned on the tail. The jet stairs were down, a soft yellow light spilling from the open cabin door. Julian Devereaux was not there. A flight attendant in a sharp navy blue uniform greeted her at the top of the stairs. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Davis. Mr. Devereaux is just finishing a call. He will join you shortly. May I get you something to drink? Water? Champagne?" "Just water, please," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. The interior of the plane was less a jet and more a minimalist luxury apartment. Cream-colored leather seats, polished dark wood, soft, indirect lighting. There were only 8 seats in the spacious cabin. She chose one by a window and sank into the buttery leather. The flight attendant returned with a bottle of Evian and a crystal glass. A few minutes later, Julian Devereaux came aboard. He was taller than she remembered from the conference, dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored gray suit, without a tie. His dark hair had strands of silver at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and intelligent, watchful eyes. He didn't exude Mark's loud, performative power. His was a quiet, contained authority. It was in the way he moved, in the economy of his gestures. "Ms. Davis," he said, offering a small, polite nod. He didn't offer to shake her hand, a gesture she was grateful for. He was maintaining a professional distance. "Thank you for trusting me." "I'm not sure if it's trust or desperation," she answered honestly, surprised by her own frankness. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed his face. "Honesty is a good starting point. Please, make yourself comfortable. The flight to Paris is approximately 11 hours. You should try to rest." He took a seat across the aisle, not directly opposite her, giving her space. He opened a slim leather portfolio and began to read, the small lamp above his seat illuminating his concentrated expression. He didn't try to make conversation. He didn't ask her invasive questions about her situation. He simply created a pocket of calm for her to exist in. As the jet began to taxi, Eleanor looked out the window. The plane turned, and for a moment, she had a perfect, glittering view of the New York skyline. The tower where Mark's office stood loomed tall, a beacon of the power and wealth she was leaving behind. She thought of him, probably at home or at a bar with his friends, laughing, confident in his prediction. "You'll be back, crawling." A quiet fury, cold and clean, burned in her chest. The engines came to life, a powerful, controlled sound that vibrated through her seat. The jet sped down the runway, faster and faster, pushing her back into the soft leather. And then, the magical, weightless moment of takeoff. Eleanor watched as the lights of New York shrank beneath them, becoming a web of gold and silver threads against the dark earth. With every foot of altitude they gained, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, the suffocating pressure of her life with Mark, the judgment of his social circle, the crushing burden of his expectations. It was all down there, getting smaller and smaller, until it was just another pattern of lights in the vast blackness. She was flying away, not just from a man, but from a version of herself she no longer recognized. She was flying toward an unknown future, carrying a secret new life within her. She looked at Julian Devereaux. He was still engrossed in his papers, a man of immense power, using it not to crush or to control, but to... what? To open a door? She still didn't understand his motives, and the uncertainty was a hum of anxiety beneath the surface. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of agency. She had made a decision, a terrifying, reckless choice. But it was hers. The flight attendant dimmed the cabin lights. Eleanor rested her head against the cool window, the hum of the engines a lullaby. For the first time in a very long time, she closed her eyes and felt a glimmer of peace. She was ascending. Eleanor woke to the gentle touch of the flight attendant on her shoulder. "Ms. Davis, we'll be landing in Paris in 20 minutes. She had slept, a deep, dreamless sleep that had eluded her for months. The exhaustion had been more than physical. It was so profound, and the hours of uninterrupted peace in the silent cabin had been a powerful balm. Outside the window, the blackness of the Atlantic had given way to the soft pre-dawn gray of a European sky. Julian was no longer in his seat. The cabin was empty, save for her and the flight attendant. "Mr. Devereaux asked me not to wake you," the attendant said with a warm smile. "He's in the forward cabin. He said to tell you Jean-Pierre will be waiting for you once we clear customs at Le Bourget." The landing was as smooth as the takeoff. Le Bourget Airport, like its New York counterpart, was a realm of private, discreet travel. There were no crowds, no long lines. A silent official stamped her passport with a swift, efficient thump. And just as promised, Jean-Pierre was waiting on the other side, his expression as calm and reassuring as before. The car ride into Paris as the sun began to rise was like stepping into a dream. The city was still waking up, the streets bathed in a palette of soft rose and gold. They drove down grand boulevards lined with Haussmannian buildings, their ornate iron balconies like lace against the pale stone. The air that wafted through the car's vents smelled of rain-washed streets and fresh-baked bread. Jean-Pierre pulled the car to a stop on a quiet, tree-lined street in the 6th arrondissement, just across from the magnificent expanse of the Luxembourg Gardens. He led her to a heavy, carved wooden door, pressed a code, and ushered her into a small, elegant courtyard. "The apartment is on the 4th floor, the penthouse," he explained, leading her to a small, wrought-iron elevator. "Monsieur Devereaux felt you would appreciate the light." The word apartment was a profound understatement. The elevator opened directly into a spacious, light-filled space that stole her breath away. The entire front of the apartment was a wall of glass, with 3 sets of French doors leading out onto a wide stone terrace, and beyond it, a perfect panoramic view of the Luxembourg Gardens and the Parisian rooftops stretching to the horizon. The space was furnished with an impeccable, minimalist taste, that echoed the private jet. A large, comfortable-looking cream-colored sofa, a few sleek armchairs, a single, powerful abstract painting on one wall that pulsed with color. The floors were a warm, honey-colored parquet. On a large wooden dining table sat a vase of white peonies, a fresh baguette, a small wheel of cheese and a note, Eleanor walked over and picked it up. The handwriting was sharp and angular. "Eleanor, welcome to Paris. I hope this space brings you some peace. The kitchen is stocked. Jean-Pierre will leave a set of keys and a burner phone for you. My personal number is programmed in. Use it only if you need to. I have business in Geneva and will not disturb you. There is a sketchbook and a set of pencils at the desk. Sometimes, the best way to find your voice is to draw a new world. Julian." Her eyes went to a sleek, modern desk in the corner, and there they were, a beautiful leather-bound sketchbook and a row of perfectly sharpened graphite pencils. It was such a specific, thoughtful gesture. He had not just given her a place to stay, he had given her back her tools. He saw her not as a victim, but as a creator. Jean-Pierre set her suitcase down by the door. "Madame, do you require anything else?" "No, Jean-Pierre. This is more than enough." "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Monsieur Devereaux also arranged for a doctor's appointment. A woman. Dr. Sylvie Rousseau is one of the top obstetricians in Paris. Her office is a short walk from here. The appointment is for tomorrow at 10. Her details are next to the phone," he added gently, his eyes kind. "He thought you might want some peace of mind." Eleanor stared at him, stunned. He knew. Julian knew she was pregnant. How could he possibly have known? She hadn't told anyone. Had he seen the test in the motel trash? Had his resourceful people found out? The thought was invasive, a violation of her most private secret. A cold knot of her old fear and suspicion returned. Was this sanctuary just a more beautiful cage? Was this another man trying to manage her life? As if reading her mind, Jean-Pierre said quietly, "Monsieur Devereaux is a very observant man, madame. At the gala, he noted that you avoided the wine, but also that you placed a protective hand on your stomach several times when your husband wasn't looking. It was only an inference, a guess. He apologizes if it was an overstep. An inference, not espionage. Observation. A quiet, intelligent perceptiveness that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with paying attention. Mark had never noticed such a detail in 6 years. Julian had noticed it in a single night from across a crowded room. The fear receded, replaced by a complex wave of gratitude and bewilderment. After Jean-Pierre left, Eleanor was alone in the magnificent, silent apartment. She walked out onto the terrace. The air was fresh and crisp. Below her, Parisians were beginning their day. Joggers on the gravel paths of the garden, children in uniforms walking to school. The distant sound of an accordion playing. It was all so real, so vibrant. She was 1,000 miles from Mark, from the whispers of his social circle, from the crushing weight of his boast. Here, she was anonymous. She was just a woman on a balcony, with a view of a garden and a secret in her belly. For the first time since she had seen those 2 pink lines, the terror was eclipsed by a fragile, tentative sprout of joy. A baby. Her baby. Here, in this beautiful city, she could give this child a life of peace, a world away from their father's toxic ambition. She walked back inside and went to the desk. She picked up one of the pencils. The weight of it in her hand was familiar, comforting. It felt like coming home to herself. She opened the sketchbook to the first clean white page. For a long moment, she just stared at it, the emptiness a reflection of her own future. Then, slowly, hesitantly at first, And then, with growing confidence, she began to draw. Not a building, not a grand design. She drew the view from the window, the soft curve of the rooftops, the intricate pattern of the formal gardens, the gentle play of the morning light. She was drawing a new world, and for the first time, it felt possible. The days in Paris melted into a soft, healing rhythm. Eleanor fell into a routine dictated not by a social calendar or a husband's demands, but by her own needs and the quiet insistence of the life growing inside her. She woke with the sun, the light flooding the apartment, and began each day on the terrace with a cup of herbal tea, watching the city come to life. The appointment with Dr. Rousseau had been a revelation. The doctor was a warm, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who spoke perfect English. She confirmed the 8-week pregnancy and treated Eleanor with a compassionate professionalism that was a world away from Mark's derogatory accusations of her being emotional. For the first time, Eleanor felt her pregnancy was a medical reality to be nurtured, not a psychological weakness to be managed. Julian remained a ghost. He kept his word, leaving her in complete peace. Money for her expenses appeared seamlessly in a bank account opened in her name. There were no calls, no texts, no check-ins. His absence was as powerful a statement as his initial offer. This space was hers, no strings attached. The power imbalance was undeniable. He was the invisible benefactor, the architect of her escape. But he wielded his power with a lightness of touch that felt like freedom, not control. With her basic needs so elegantly handled, Eleanor's mind, freed from the constant hum of anxiety, began to clear. She explored her neighborhood on foot. The 6th arrondissement was the Paris of books and dreams, a labyrinth of charming streets filled with art galleries, independent bookstores, and pastry shops that displayed their creations like jewels. She spent hours at the Shakespeare and Company bookstore, losing herself in the smell of old paper. Or she would sit at a cafe with her sketchbook, drawing the faces of strangers, the lines of buildings, the play of light on a wet cobblestone street. Slowly, tentatively, the architect inside her began to reawaken. She found herself looking at the craftsmanship of a centuries-old door, the structural audacity of the Pompidou Center, the soaring vaults of Notre Dame, which still bore the scars of its fire, but was resilient, its spirit intact. She saw stories in the stone, a language she had almost forgotten she could speak, her sketchbook filled with ideas, not for grand commissions, but for personal, intimate spaces. A nursery, where the light would shift throughout the day, a small urban community garden built on a forgotten rooftop, a library with a reading nook perfectly positioned to catch the afternoon sun. She was designing for life, for comfort, for peace. She was designing for herself. About a month into her stay, she received a text message. It was from Julian. "I am back in Paris for 2 days. I hope you are well. Would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow evening? There is a quiet restaurant I like." Eleanor's heart did a small, nervous flutter. The ghost was materializing. Part of her was terrified. His presence would make this strange, dreamlike reality concrete. Another part of her was intensely curious about the man who had orchestrated this radical shift in her life. And a third, smaller part simply wanted to thank him appropriately. She accepted. He sent Jean-Pierre to collect her, even though the restaurant was only a 10-minute walk. It was a small, unassuming place called L'Ambroise on the Ile Saint-Louis. No sign, just a discreetly lit doorway. Inside was a refuge of quiet elegance. Julian was waiting at a corner table. He stood as she approached, dressed again in a simple dark suit, the epitome of understated power. "Eleanor," he said, his eyes meeting hers. He used her first name for the first time. "You look well. Paris suits you." "It's the tranquility," she said, taking the seat he offered. "And the carbs." A small smile touched his lips. A formidable combination. The dinner was not what she expected. He didn't pry into her past or her plans. Instead, he asked her about her explorations of the city. He asked her what she thought of the new Frank Gehry building at the Louis Vuitton Foundation. And he listened. Truly listened. As she gave her critique, praising its ambition, but questioning its human scale. They talked about art, books, and architecture. She discovered he was incredibly well-read, his mind sharp and curious. He spoke of cities as living organisms, of buildings as shells that could either crush or nurture the human spirit. She found herself speaking with a passion she hadn't felt in years, the words tumbling out of her, her hands drawing shapes in the air. "Mark always said my work was impractical," she confessed at one point, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Practicality is often the enemy of vision," Julian replied softly. What he meant was, it didn't serve his practicality. There is a difference. Under his intelligent, respectful gaze, she felt herself unfolding. She wasn't Mark Vargas's broken wife. She was Eleanor Davis, an architect with ideas. He saw her, the person she had been burying for years. When they were finishing dessert, a light lemon tart, she finally summoned the courage to ask the question that had been hovering at the back of her mind. "Julian, why? The jet, the apartment, all of this. I know what you said on the phone about wasted potential, but it's too much. No one does something like this." He put down his fork and looked at her, his expression serious. "My mother was a painter," he began, his voice quiet. "A brilliant one. She had a fellowship to study in Florence when she was young. She had a fire in her. Then she met my father. He was a very powerful, very charming man. He loved the idea of having a talented wife, but he couldn't stand the reality of it. Her time in the studio, her passion for something other than him, was a threat." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "He didn't lock her up," Julian continued, his gaze distant. "He did it slowly, with compliments that were also a cage. You're too brilliant to sell your work, my love. Let's keep it just for us." He bought her the best supplies, built her a magnificent studio, and filled her life with so many social obligations, so many duties as his wife, that she never had the time or energy to use it. He extinguished her fire with a velvet glove. He looked back at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient pain. "She died when I was 20. She wasn't old, but her spirit was." The studio was filled with blank canvases. At the gala, when I saw your husband dismiss your life's work with a joke, and I saw the look in your eyes, I saw my mother. I saw the beginning of the same story. I have the resources to offer a different ending. So I did. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and deeply personal. This wasn't about pity. It was about empathy. It was about him trying to right a wrong that had shaped his own life. The hidden motive wasn't sinister. It was heartbreakingly human. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Julian." "Don't be." His voice had regained its composure. "Just don't let anyone keep your canvases blank." When Jean-Pierre drove her home that night, the silence in the car felt different. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but the comfortable silence of a shared understanding. The power imbalance was still there, a fact of their circumstances. But now it was colored with context, with humanity. Back in the apartment, she went to the window and looked out at the sleeping city. Julian Devereux was not a savior or a prince. He was a man shaped by his own loss, a man who saw a reflection of his mother's tragedy and chose to intervene. He hadn't rescued her. He had simply opened a door and trusted that she would walk through it. She put a hand on her stomach, where the first soft flutters of life were just beginning. She was not his mother. Her story would have a different ending. She picked up her pencil. The lines she drew that night were stronger, bolder, filled with a newfound purpose. The next few months were a period of quiet blossoming. The morning sickness faded, replaced by a surge of energy. Eleanor's belly began to swell, a gentle, wondrous curve that she would trace with her hands as she stood on the terrace each morning. The baby was a tangible presence now, a secret companion in her Parisian life. Her work became her focus. The sketchbook was no longer enough. She bought drafting software, set up a proper workspace on the big dining table, and lost herself in creation. She was designing a theoretical project, a women's shelter, but it was unlike any shelter she had ever seen. It was built around a central, sun-drenched, secure courtyard. The rooms were small but private, each with its own window that looked onto greenery. There were communal kitchens, a library, a childcare center, and workshop spaces where women could learn new skills. It was not a place for victims to hide. It was a place for survivors to rebuild. It was humane, dignified, and fierce. It was everything she had ever needed. She and Julian settled into a comfortable, if unconventional, friendship. He would text her every week or two when he was in Paris, and they would have dinner or walk through the Musée d'Orsay, talking for hours about the Impressionists' use of light. Their conversations were a meeting of minds, a respite for them both. There was a soft, unspoken chemistry between them, a warmth that hovered just below the surface of their friendship. But neither of them crossed that line. It was too soon, the ground still too shaky. For now, this intellectual and emotional companionship was more than enough. One autumn afternoon, Eleanor was returning from the market, her bags full of fresh produce, when she saw him. He was standing across the street, looking up at her building. Mark. The sight of him was a physical shock. The air rushed from her lungs, the vibrant colors of the Parisian street fading to gray. He looked thinner, his tailored suit seeming to hang on him a little. But the arrogance was still there in the set of his jaw, in the way he was surveying the building as if evaluating its worth. For a terrifying moment, she froze. The old fear, the conditioned response to his presence, seized her. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, to crawl back into the beautiful cage and lock the door. Then she felt a small, persistent kick within her, a tiny life reminding her she was no longer just fighting for herself. That small flutter of movement was an anchor. It grounded her. The fear was still there, but now it was laced with a surge of pure, goodbye, primal anger. How dare he? How dare he bring his toxicity to her sanctuary? He saw her. His eyes locked onto hers across the street. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. The smile of a hunter who has finally cornered his prey. He started to walk toward her, sidestepping a sputtering scooter. She didn't run. She stood her ground on the sidewalk, her grocery bags a flimsy shield. She lifted her chin, her heart hammering, but her expression a mask of a calm she didn't feel. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low purr as he reached her. "I have to admit, this is a more elaborate tantrum than I expected. A Parisian love nest from a billionaire? It's a bit cliché, even for you." His eyes swept her body, taking in her simple maternity dress, her swollen belly. His smile faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of genuine shock. Then something darker. "Pregnant. And mine," he breathed, a strange, acquisitive gleam in his eye. "My son. You were going to hide my son from me." "This is my child, Mark," she said, her voice firm and cold. "You forfeited any right to be part of their life when you told me to crawl back to you." He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Oh, Ellie, don't be so dramatic. You're hormonal. I forgive you. We can go home. We'll tell everyone you were on an extended European holiday. It's time to end this little game." He reached out a hand to grab her arm. She flinched back sharply. "It's not a game. It's my life, and you're not in it anymore." The rejection, so clear and definitive, wiped the smile from his face. His expression hardened into the familiar mask of fury she knew so well. "Don't be a fool. What do you think this Devereaux man wants with you? A pregnant, runaway wife? You're a temporary diversion for him, a charity case. When he gets bored, he'll toss you out and you'll have nothing. Again, I'm offering you a way back to your life, to our life. The life you offer me is a cage, Mark. I'm done with cages," she said. "This is a bigger cage," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're just a kept woman. You traded my control for his. At least with me, you had status. With him, you're just a secret." He was using his old weapons, belittling her, defining her reality for her, making her doubt her own choices. The words were designed to find the cracks in her confidence and blow them wide open. 6 months ago, they would have worked. But she was not the same woman. She had spent months breathing free air, rebuilding her sense of self from the ground up. She had a life, a purpose, a child to protect. "The difference," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised them both, "is that Julian gave me a key. You just changed the locks. Now, I need you to leave." "I'm not going anywhere," he snapped, taking a step closer. "You're my wife." "No," said a calm voice from behind Eleanor. "She's not." Julian had appeared as silently as dusk. He wasn't in a suit, but casual slacks and a dark sweater. He didn't look threatening, but his presence shifted the entire dynamic of the street. He simply stood next to Eleanor, a solid, reassuring force. He didn't touch her, but she could feel his support like a physical shield. Mark stared at Julian, his expression a mixture of hate and envy. "Devereaux, the great man himself, come to protect your new pet project?" Julian ignored the taunt. His gaze was fixed on Mark, his eyes cold and analytical. "Mr. Vargas, you are trespassing on a private matter. Eleanor has made her intentions clear. I suggest you book a flight back to New York. There is nothing for you here." "My child is here," Mark spat. "A child she is carrying, and a child she will protect from your particular brand of parenting," Julian said, his voice still quiet, but with a layer of ice now. "I know your firm has been trying to secure a second round of funding for the Atherton project. I happen to be a lead investor in the consortium you're courting. Your behavior here, harassing a pregnant woman on a public street, could be seen as indicative of poor judgment. Unstable. It was a checkmate, delivered without a single raised voice." Mark's face went pale. Julian wasn't threatening him physically. He was threatening the only thing Mark truly valued: his reputation, his career, his money. Mark looked at Julian, then at Eleanor, his face a mask of impotent rage. He saw her standing there, not broken or pleading, but defended, protected, and strong. He saw that he had lost, absolutely and completely. Without another word, he turned and walked away, a ghost finally banished from the feast. Eleanor let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs felt weak. Julian turned to her, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, tears of relief and residual fear blurring her vision. He said I was just trading one cage for another." Julian's gaze was direct and filled with a deep sincerity. "Eleanor, the only person who can build a cage around you is yourself. My only intention was to give you the space and the tools to build a door instead. Did it work?" She looked from his earnest face to the beautiful building that housed her sanctuary, her hand resting on the life within her. She thought of the designs on her computer, the blueprint for a place of healing born from her own pain. "Yes," she whispered, a watery smile breaking through the tears. It worked. The confrontation with Mark left an echo, not of fear, but of finality. It was a door slammed shut on the past, the lock turned. But it also brought into sharp focus the quiet, unresolved questions about her future with Julian. He had protected her, not by fighting her battle for her, but by strategically dismantling her opponent. He had treated her like an ally, not a victim to be rescued. That evening, the beautiful apartment felt different. It was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a home she had defended. Julian had offered to stay in a hotel to give her space, but she had insisted he stay for dinner. She needed to close this circle, to move from the ambiguity of their arrangement to the clarity of truth. She made a simple pasta, and they ate at the dining table, which was now covered with her architectural drawings. The blueprints for the Vance house the board had insisted on naming the shelter in her honor were spread out, a testament to her work over the past months. For a while they ate in a comfortable silence. Then Eleanor pushed her plate away. "Your threat to him," she said, "about his funding. You would have done it, wouldn't you?" Julian looked at her without hesitation. "Yes. Men like Vargas only understand the language of power and consequences." I spoke to him in his native tongue. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for today, for everything. But Julian, I can't live on your charity forever. I won't. I've been working on this." She gestured to the blueprints. "It's just a design, a concept, but it's the best work I've ever done. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, for me and the baby." He looked down at the drawings, not with a cursory glance, but with the focused eye of someone who understood design. He spent several minutes studying the layout, the flow of the spaces, the notes she had made in the margins about materials and light. "This is not a concept, Eleanor," he said finally, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "This is a manifesto. It's a statement about dignity, safety, and community. It's brilliant." He looked back at her. "The Devereaux Foundation has a philanthropic fund for innovative urban architecture. We focus on projects that have a significant social impact. We receive hundreds of proposals a year." He paused, and her heart began to beat faster. "This," he said, tapping the drawings, "is better than anything I've seen in the last 5 years. I want you to present it, not to me, but to the board. I'll recuse myself from the vote, of course, but I think you have a very good chance of it being fully funded." Eleanor stared at him, speechless. He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her a professional opportunity, a legitimate path to independence, built on the foundation of her own talent. He was offering her a way to turn her pain into a tangible, lasting legacy that could help countless other women. It was the greatest gift he possibly could have given her. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed. "Say you'll do it," he urged gently. "This deserves to be built." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes, okay." A tender smile transformed his usually serious features. He leaned across the table, not to take her hand, but to lightly touch the edge of one of the blueprints, a gesture of shared respect for the work. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The last barrier between them, the unspoken dynamic of benefactor and beneficiary, had dissolved, replaced by the equilibrium of professional peers. What remained was something both simpler and infinitely more complicated. The quiet, powerful attraction that had been simmering between them for months. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping, becoming more personal. There's something else I need to confess. My mother. The story I told you was true, but I left out a part. The part about Meme. I was a teenager when I began to understand what my father was doing to her, how he was dimming her light. I saw it, but I did nothing. I was a child, yes, but I was old enough to speak up, to stand up for her, and I stayed silent. I was afraid of him, of his anger, of losing the comfort and privilege he provided. His gaze was filled with a decades-old, but still raw shame. When she died, I promised myself I would never again stand by and watch a brilliant woman be diminished by a man's ego. When I saw you that night at the gala, it was like a second chance, an opportunity to do what I was too cowardly to do for my own mother. His vulnerability was a raw, open wound. She finally understood the depth of his motivation. This was his redemption, not just hers. He wasn't just saving her. He was, in some small way, trying to save his mother's memory and forgive the boy he had been. "You were a child, Julian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You can't carry that guilt." "Perhaps," he said, "but it has driven me. It drove me to find you. It drove me to offer you this apartment. And I have tried, every step of the way, to use my power in the way my father never did. To empower, not to possess." He finally looked up and met her eyes, his own shining with an intensity that made her heart ache. But somewhere along the way, my motives changed. It stopped being about my mother, and it started being about you. I have come to admire you more than anyone I have ever met. "Eleanor Davis," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur. "Your resilience, your fire, your talent, the way you see the world. And I have fallen in love with you." He said it simply, like a statement of fact. There was no demand in his words, no expectation. It was an offering laid bare on the table between them, next to the blueprints of their future. Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness, of a circle closing. This was no fairy tale romance. This was something real, forged in trauma and rebuilt with respect, empathy, and shared ideals. He hadn't fallen in love with a damsel in distress. He had fallen in love with the woman she was becoming, the woman he had helped her see in herself again. And she, in turn, had fallen in love with him. For his quiet strength, his surprising kindness, his brilliant mind, and the deep well of goodness he tried so hard to hide behind a professional exterior. She stood up, walked around the table, and stopped in front of him. He looked at her, his expression uncertain for the first time. She didn't say a word. She simply leaned down and kissed him. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate relief. It was a kiss of profound mutual understanding. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances, of quiet healing, and of a future waiting to be built together. It was the language of light and stone, a whispered promise in the heart of Paris. A year later, the Parisian sunlight poured through the same windows, but it illuminated a different world. The large dining table was still a workspace, but now the architectural blueprints for the Vance house, the board had insisted on naming the shelter in her honor, shared space with a scattering of baby bottles, a half-chewed teether, and a small stuffed giraffe. In the center of the living room, on a soft sheepskin rug, Julian Devereaux sat cross-legged on the floor, making a ridiculously complicated face at the 6-month-old baby girl propped against a cushion. The baby, Lily Rose Devereaux, gurgled with delight and reached a small, chubby hand up to pat his nose. Lily had Eleanor's sapphire eyes and Julian's quiet, observant nature. She was a child of peace, born into a world of love and light, a world her mother had fought so hard to create for her. Eleanor stood by the window watching them, a soft smile on her lips. The sight of this powerful, formidable man, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, utterly captivated by their tiny daughter, filled her heart with a warmth that was almost overwhelming. Her life was unrecognizable from the suffocating existence she had fled in New York. The Vance house was now under construction in a quiet neighborhood in the downtown district, a rising structure of sustainable wood and recycled steel. Eleanor was on site several times a week, her hard hat on, overseeing the project with a confidence that felt like a second skin. She was no longer just an architect. She was a creator, a leader, a testament to the fact that you could lay a new foundation at any point in life. Her relationship with Julian had blossomed into a deep, profound partnership. They weren't married. Not yet. They were in no hurry. They were too busy building their life, their family, their future, on a foundation of mutual respect and absolute trust. He was her fiercest advocate and her most astute critic, pushing her to be bolder in her designs. She, in turn, had brought a softness and a light to his carefully ordered world, teaching him the joy of unstructured Sunday mornings and the simple pleasure of falling asleep with a baby on his chest. The power imbalance that had once defined their circumstances had found its equilibrium. He was still a billionaire, and she a working architect. But in their home, they were simply Julian and Eleanor, partners in everything. Mark was a distant memory, a ghost she had long since stopped thinking about. She had heard through her sister Maya that his firm had lost the funding for the Atherton project. His reputation had taken a hit, and his carefully constructed world had begun to crumble under the weight of his own arrogance. He had tried to contest the divorce, to claim Lily, but Julian's lawyers, combined with Eleanor's own testimony and the evidence of his financial control, had left him with no leg to stand on. He had faded from her life, a footnote in a story that had become an epic. Julian looked up from his daddy duties and met her eyes. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that was only reserved for her and their daughter. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about blueprints," she said, walking to join them on the rug. She sat down, and Lily immediately turned to lean against her mother's leg. "The shelter?" he asked, stroking Lily's fine, dark hair. "That," Eleanor said, "and others. I was thinking about the blueprint of us. How did we start with a broken foundation and build this?" She gestured to the room, to the baby, to the drawings, to the life they had created. Julian wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You drew the blueprints, Eleanor," he said softly. "I just provided some of the materials." She looked at the plans for the Vance house, the clean lines that promised safety and a new start for so many women. Then she looked down at Lily, her own beautiful, perfect creation. She was building more than just buildings. She was building a future. Outside, the bells of a nearby church began to chime, their notes drifting on the evening air. It was a sound that had once been foreign and was now the soundtrack of her home. She had been carried to Paris as a desperate, pregnant woman, escaping a bragging ex-husband. She had been offered a sanctuary, and she had turned it into a life. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning built not on magic, but on resilience, courage, and the quiet, extraordinary power of a second chance. Do you see it? Eleanor's story isn't about being rescued by a billionaire. It's a story about what happens when a woman, pushed to her breaking point, reclaims her own power. It's about discovering that the most solid foundation you can ever build is the one you design yourself. True freedom isn't escaping a cage. It's realizing you had the blueprints for the door all along. What did you think of Eleanor's journey? Do you believe Julian's motives were pure from the start, or did they evolve? Let us know in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Thanks for watching.